Good morning. It is Thursday, and it's about 10 minutes after 10. So, this is Jason Dean here at Film Fanatic headquarters. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's greatly appreciated. I love the responses some of these videos have been getting, and I've been really surprised by certain videos I've been doing. The amount of hits they've been, that they've been getting. They've been. I've got a group of videos that a few thousand people have been checking out. So I really appreciate that. And as I've said many times before, this is all like a work in progress, and I'm just going into this whole thing on just straight up kind of love and passion for a lot of these weird films. That being said, still trying to develop things as I go. The main thing I've been doing is cranking out lots of new videos. It's been a lot easier because of my schedule and the way I do the videos. I remember when I first started doing the Facebook videos, it was funny because I thought, well, I'll just do it once a month or whatever. At first, I was really reluctant to do any videos because I felt like, well, I'm not really comfortable, kind of speaking in public. I'm not really comfortable, kind of in that format in general, in person. And I had a situation during the start of the pandemic where I had to, I had a pretty good amount of private students, and because of all of the strict, guidelines, we weren't able to get together in person. So a few of the students I had, we tried doing the lessons through Zoom, and it was kind of a disaster. Not only for me, it was from a technical standpoint. I had never done it before, so I was really trying to figure it out. And when I did, it was really rough. But then I just never really felt comfortable. And then also the kids and my students didn't really feel that comfortable doing it. And at that time, most of the students I had were kids, so it was, although they were probably more tech savvy than I am, but so I ended up, kind of canning it. So it kind of gave me less confidence on doing any kind of video things, moving forward into the future. And that was a couple of years ago. But that was a reluctancy of mine to start doing originally the Facebook Live videos. And then I did it, and I noticed that, okay, this is helping, and it didn't go as badly as I thought it was going to go. And I noticed that, people were checking it out, and over a couple of months, I, noticed that people were checking out things more and more, commenting, and then also it was helping the visibility of the page. At that point, it was just a Facebook page, the Facebook page that I have, Film Fanatic. So, but then I kind of got into a spot of where I'm gonna just probably do this maybe once or twice a month. So I was spreading out the videos of where I was just doing them. I typically would do them on Saturdays during the day, and then occasionally do a second one during the week. But usually I would, space it out. And I kind of felt like, well, I don't want to oversaturate myself, with people who are digging this page, and maybe it's going to be, if I do it weekly or something of where it's a reoccurring thing constantly, I could like get this feeling of, or cause this situation of where I'm like kind of overstaying my welcome. But since I've been doing the YouTube channel, and it's a lot easier in regards mostly, like I've said, to my schedule and the way I kind of do these videos now, I kind of, it's way easier for me to do them. And I've been doing them during the week. Usually I don't have a set time. I usually do one video a day, and on one part of the spectrum, it's it's kind of therapy for me in a lot of ways. I like talking about these things. I like trying to connect music and film and tie it back how it influences me. try to bring maybe a little bit of a different angle to how I talk about films, or how I, like, quote unquote, like, review films. So I change it up a little bit. One thing I try to be mindful of is I realize that, obviously there are lots of people that I don't know that are checking out these videos now, which is really great, and I really appreciate it. And I know outside of my circle that I have here in Maine, my immediate friends, and my little social circle, a lot of the things I talk about, they would probably understand, and kind of understand, get the references, or just talking about, when I talk about being a musician in Midcoast Maine and blah blah blah, like they understand that and get that. But I understand that most people outside of that, out of state, or people that I might not actually know per se, they they might wonder, they might be turned off by me talking about other things. And I had a friend that suggested that maybe, you know, be mindful of that going forward with making these videos, and talk about things in regards to thinking about, well, other people outside of your little circle are not going to be really in tune to that. So I understand that, and I'm trying to do something a little bit more catered towards that. But also at the same time, what I'm doing it is what it is. So I just try to come from a sincere place, and I'll probably just kind of continue doing these videos the way they are, as far as how I'm presenting them. Technically, I will hopefully, improve on certain things, obviously. And then the thing that I really want to do, like I've mentioned, are these interview segments. So that's going to be something I really want to kind of move towards doing more of. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and something I'm very, very excited about. So stay tuned for a lot of those things. And I kind of always think of, different ways or different angles that you can do something that might be a little bit more unique, or something as a viewer, or a fan of of a particular medium. Try to think of it in a way of, like, what would you like to see? What would you like to see something, viewed through a little bit of a different lens? So I kind of think of most things around this channel in that view also. So I try to give it a different spin. Whether it works or not, that's questionable. But at this point, that way of talking and expressing my views for what they're worth feels just natural to me. So I'll probably just kind of continue with the actual format as the same. But I also appreciate very much so. I appreciate people's feedback. And one of the things too I've been really excited about is the videos that I have been posting on my YouTube channel. The ones that are getting the most hits are the films that are probably the most obscure films that I have in my collection. So I've been really surprised by that. And I understand that there's definitely a niche for that. So that's been really cool and surprising. So moving forward, I'll obviously try to keep mixing things up, and trying to just represent movies and talk about films that are, for the most part, not so well known, with that kind of goal in my mind. But then also talking about movies that I just generally love, and not really thinking about that. So I'm trying to mix things up a lot more in the future. I've been doing these, or moving forward in the future, I've been doing these other series of where I've been doing these franchise shows. So one show, or one idea that I have coming up, which I think I'm going to probably start in the next couple weeks or so, for another franchise series, which is quite a few movies. I'm thinking of doing a series on all of the Hammer films, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And Christopher Lee is most well known as, well, in the Hammer films, as Dracula. And there was a whole period of films in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and I think maybe even early 80s, but the heyday was like the 60s and 70s. Hammer Films was basically, and it actually still exists, but it was a company that came out in England that specialized in these like very theatrical kind of gothic horror films, and they used a lot of the monsters and creatures that were based from or based out of the Universal monsters. You know, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Wolfman. They're probably the Hammer films were probably most well known, or at least for me, growing up, it was a regular staple of my diet as far as, just checking out and watching horror films constantly. Was Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee as the iconic Dracula. And as a kid, those films used to always be on cable. And also, I remember have these vivid memories of always renting them. And they're like, those films are, you know, beloved to me. So I have all of them. I don't, unfortunately, I only have like one or two on Blu-ray, which is kind of terrible. But I own all of the films pretty much in the entire collection. I own all of the Dracula films. I love the other films too that are more based around Frankenstein and the Mummy. But my favorite uh, period of films in the Hammer series are the Dracula films. So I'm probably going to do a show of where I'm going to cover that whole period of of those films. I just love those films to death, and so stay tuned for that. So that's probably going to be the next franchise thing, and there's a lot of films. There's a lot to it. It'll be pretty involved, so that will be a fun show. The other thing too that I'm working on that I have three other things that are going on right now. I'm still in the midst of booking a time. Right now, it's been a little bit of an issue around the time and scheduling, but I'm going to be having an actress who was in the Friday 13th movies. She was in one movie in one of the franchise, one of the biggest movies. I haven't announced who she is yet or the film until I will do that. I will wait. I'm waiting to do that till I actually have a scheduled time for when we're going to do our show. But I'm very, very excited. I have my fingers crossed that all of those things that it will still happen. It's been a little bit of a scheduling. Uh, it's been a little bit of a conflict with our schedules. So, but that's one thing I'm very, very excited about. So as soon as things are secured with that, I will make a post about that, and then we'll do the show. The other show I'm going to be doing is I have a student who that I teach, and I found out a week or two ago or a few weeks ago that he has a pretty extensive background as an actor in a lot of these, kind of modern underground grindhouse horror films. Super independent. A lot of the things that he's done have been involved with a lot of the shot and video movies which now is a pretty big genre. I did a show last month on Suburban Sasquatch, which is a fairly recent movie and just amazing, just an amazing movie. To me it's a total modern like grindhouse horror film, but it was all shot on video, and it's so utterly terrible and ridiculous, but it's just so amazing. And when I discovered that film and I was checking out movies that were kind of similar to that, I realized that there's this whole kind of movement or scene that's based in that, and I was kind of amazed. So my student Ray was when he told me about that he had a background in some of these films, these real low budget films. I looked him up, and I found a bunch of clips. There's a bunch of things on YouTube, and I was pretty blown away how much they reminded me of something in that genre, like the shot and video. Super low budget and terrible, but amazing at the same time. So he's going to be a guest on the show, and we're going to talk about his background and his experiences working on these films. And he's a super cool guy, super interesting. He's got this amazing story. He's got this, wide range of a background and different careers. The main focus will be about the films, but he's got all these great stories around it, and he's an awesome dude. So we're gonna do an interview for the channel coming up pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. That will be a fun and interesting thing. And the other show I'm going to be doing, which I'm actually going to be doing tomorrow, which kind of started off as, or at least the idea of it was kind of started off as kind of maybe a joke or not something that I was like seriously thinking of doing, because I thought, well, maybe that's just really kind of silly or cheesy in the wrong way. I'm not sure, but I thought, when I thought about it, when it came up, and then I started thinking about it more, and then it became kind of a serious idea where I was like, no, like I think this will be a great thing to do, and and it makes sense, and it's a little bit silly, but it makes sense. So I'm going to have my mom on the show, and the reason I'm doing that is because I've talked a lot about, I've always had a really good relationship with my folks, but I've talked a lot about my family and my close friends on this show. But the reason that I thought about having my mom on the show as a guest was she was the main person in my life, really, from, well, she gave birth to me, but she was the first person who introduced me to horror movies. She is, in her own right, a film fanatic. And she was, growing up, she always loved a lot of slasher films. She loved like the Nightmare on Elm Street films. She loved the Friday 13th films. She was always really into, and still is into, the movies of Alfred Hitchcock. She's really into the Final Destination series, Halloween. I mean, you name it. A lot of those franchise things that came out in the 80s and stuff, the 70s. So, and I remember literally my earliest, recollection of watching or seeing TV or movies were those movies as a kid. And we used to go to, as a family, we used to go to the theater a lot. So, without being raised, if I wasn't raised that way, and also she let me, watch movies and films and things of that nature that I think in this day and age, most parents would probably not allow their kids that are under 18 to watch rated R movies, and especially like the hardcore slasher films that came out during that period. So I don't think that would fly these days. So my mom did let me watch a lot of those films, and that really, I feel that really warped my brain for the right reasons, or in the right way, if that's a thing. So she's going to be a guest on the show, and I think it's going to be hilarious, but I think it could be cool. So we're going to do that tomorrow. So look forward to that. So I got those 3 or 4 things coming up. As far as Quantum goes, I'm in the midst right now of trying to, like I said, and I've talked about it a lot before, but I've been doing a lot, doing lots of, well, we did a lot of shows this summer with Quantum, and it was a really great season, and I've talked about it a lot. And we haven't played a gig, and it's probably been about a month, 2 months now. And I felt like this summer was really great, and I felt like we were riding a wave for a while. We had put out a new album, and it felt like a lot of things were like we were riding this wave, and felt like we were slowly gaining some new fans and people that hadn't seen us. And some of the gigs were really great, and it helped with the record sales for the new album. And we just, I don't know, things were going really great, and it kind of, felt like we were riding this wave. And so it's nice having a little bit of a break, don't get me wrong, but I started also feeling like, well, we have some momentum. Let's try to keep it alive. I kind of feel like, it's this thing of like, if you have a gym membership and you like go to the gym on a weekly basis and you have a focus or you have a goal as to what you want to try to do or how you envision yourself, you go to this gym and this you work out this through this whole regimen, and you eventually see that there's some results, and you kind of to a degree achieve a lot of those things that you kind of set out, but then you build all this momentum and you get in this like kind of consistent space, but then you kind of like walk away from it, and which breaks are needed obviously, but then you kind of walk away, and suddenly that those muscles can start getting flabby because there's a break, and then it gets more and more extended, and then it kind of loses that momentum. I kind of feel like that same kind of way with Quantum. So I'm in the midst right now of trying to still book some shows. I have, you know, the one of the coolest things that's happened is, for a long time, originally when we started the band, we were doing shows with other bands and other groups, more on the lines of these, kind of what you would call like crusty punk, like underground kind of, artists, some electronic artists, but typically it was like these noisy punk bands, that were traveling through town. We had a lot of great times with them. We never really, maybe once or twice, were like a few times we did shows with other electronic artists, but generally it was always like these really eclectic and eccentric kinds of billings, and it worked because I think we obviously have that as part of our sound. Because I'm very much, I like a lot of music that could be considered to be noise or not really music by certain people. Like I love, well, electronic music is my favorite, and I've talked about that, an incredible, to a huge degree. All Techer is like my favorite band of all time, if you want to call them a band, but they're this electronic group from England. They play, and it's a duo, and they play. Actually, it's just it's two guys. They're a duo from England. They've been around for like many, 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 many years, and I've been into them, been listening to them for about 20 years, and they are. It's hard to describe some of their music. They're definitely ambient based. They have this real minimalist sound. Their stuff is also has this real disjointed kind of vibe to it, and it's. I feel like their sound. They have their roots. I feel like they almost have this very modern kind of interpretation of hip hop and rap. They have that kind of sound underneath all the other craziness. Like it has a very hip hop kind of thing to it, but it's very ambient. It's very disjointed. It's beautiful and gorgeous. I feel like their music has this incredible juxtaposition of where the ambient side to their music is just incredibly rich and beautiful and just amazing and wondrous. But then they also have this other side of their music that it's incredibly dark and brooding and intense and kind of sinister at times. But they have this cool balance of like light and dark. And then some of their stuff is very, very melodic. And then some of their music is also very, very harsh and very disorienting. So I love that they create this thing of where there's always a contrast going on. There's always these different angles and juxtaposition of different sounds. So it creates this level as a listener that you're not sure where it's going to go, and it always kind of goes back and forth. It's not always one way. It always has this. They're always kind of in the middle with these two polar opposites of their sonic palette, and I love that they, and I feel like within that kind of spectrum, the music creates this tension. So their albums are, really vast and always, for me, incredibly intriguing because there's always that tension between the styles that they adore. But they're like my favorite group. As far as other electronic music goes, I love a lot of old school house music. Some of my favorite one of my favorite periods in electronic music is, all the music that came out in the 90s, kind of considered to be house music. I love, and it was a whole series that of these different DJs and artists, electronic artists that came out of the UK in the early 90s. It was part of this thing called the Global Underground, and I obsessed with that sound for so long, and I still love that sound deeply. Like artists and DJs that came out of that, like Sasha, one of my all-time favorite artists. Also, one of the first DJs to kind of break away from traditional DJing and become an original artist. He was also one of the first guys to start using Ableton, 20 years ago when Ableton first hit. But groups like Deep Dish, another great, amazing group. They're still active. They actually broke up for a while and came back, but they're two DJs from Washington D.C. that have been around for many, many years. They specialize in like progressive house. Other DJs like Sander Kleinberg, another British DJ who does a lot of really cool progressive house. One of my favorite artists of all time is Anthony Papa, who is an Australian DJ, and he specializes in similar things in the vein of like progressive house music. Just amazing, and his music tends to be on the darker side of things. I really love, and outside of that, I love stuff. Aphex Twin is one of my favorite artists. Just amazing. I love like the early first two albums of Daft Punk. I did a show on Facebook Live way back when they broke up, and I talked all about that. But their first couple albums for me were pivotal as far as like the whole like French house music kind of scene. I Yeah, that music in particular is just incredible. Groups like Underworld, those are another great group, another band that I just can't get enough of. Old school like British group. The Chemical Brothers, another one, another band I grew up listening to. They've been around for I don't know how many years, and I still listen to them. I love Joy Division and New Order. Just amazing. Really, really influential band. One of the most, if not the most influential band on that whole scene. Just amazing. And yeah, so much great stuff. And then other groups like, tracing it back even further, groups like Suicide. Suicide is one of my favorite groups of all time, and they are an electronic group, and they were doing stuff in the 70s, and they're just amazing. And their stuff was definitely part of the no wave sound. Like they definitely had a real heavy punk, noisy, harsh, very dark kind of vibe to their music. Their music was very, I don't know how to even describe it at times. Just really jarring and intense and like kind of going for the throat. But yet they also had this thing of where their music was also kind of poppy. Amazing, one of my all-time favorite groups. And Kraftwerk, can't forget Kraftwerk. One of the greatest pioneering German krautrock bands from Germany. They're still doing it, and an amazing band. I love them to death. And as far as new stuff goes, I really love LCD Sound System. I think they're a tremendous band. Another band that does that or has electronic music, and they've put out full-on electronic music, even albums, but they also kind of started out as this real indie, kind of weird punk noise art band, and they still have that sound very much. But the Liars, they've put out a few albums of where it's all straight up electronic music, and I love their stuff. And then also going further, like with stuff that's a little bit more edgy, I love noise stuff too, like where it doesn't really have a melodic element per se, but I just love the intensity around it, and it has this kind of hypnotic quality. But like one band I really love a lot is Wapstan, that's one guy, and it's a Canadian artist, and he does this incredibly kind of noisy, harsh music. It's very atmospheric, And his albums are all pretty, very, very diverse. He put out an album a couple of years ago. I have a couple of his albums, and the stuff is very intense, and you sometimes have to be in a particular kind of mood to listen to it. But I really love it. He put out an album about 2 years ago, and I almost didn't even realize it was him. It was very different. I also love groups like Pharmacon, which is this music that's this one solo performer. She's this girl, Pharmacon. She's based in New York. She plays this really intense, edgy uh, noise kind of music, very dark, but she's amazing. So I try to listen to lots of different things in quote unquote the electronic kind of spectrum. I really love Jamie Liddell. He's a really great British singer. He blends lots of styles, predominantly out of the electronic world. Another artist I really love a lot is James Blake, who is a British UK electronic artist who is just amazing. One of the most haunting and just incredible voices you'll ever hear. So there's so much great music, but I love jazz and all kinds of things. But I try to have lots of different influences. So I have many different influences, and I try to for what it's worth, try to pour that into the band to what we do as Quantum, and also many non-electronic artists that I love that wouldn't fit under that label. But anyway, so like just within the last few months, I've come across and I've met quite a few other electronic artists that are in here in Maine. My friend Ronnie, who goes by the name of Enor, who I play in a band with called Bone Broth, he has this whole separate thing. He's an amazing musician, an amazing guitar player. He has this whole separate kind of side to him in his personality where he does this whole like kind of ambient electronic kind of thing. And we did a show together this summer. We played together at my album release show that we did this summer. He opened up for us, and he's pretty tremendous. My really great friend Eric Halsey, who I also play with, an amazing, amazing bass player. He also is part of Bone Broth also. He has his own kind of electronic solo show, which is called Halsey. Really great, awesome stuff. We did one show together at Ada's a couple of months ago, which was really fun and fantastic. Another guy, Spencer Roulard, who is a super cool guy. We also did we did one show and kind of another show together. We did like two shows together. And he has this group another solo group called Method for Madness, and it's all this real it's this very cool like kind of atmospheric modular electronic music, just amazing. And so I'm looking forward to trying to do more shows with these guys. And then recently I also was in contact with a guy named Wally who plays guitar in this band called the Mallet Brothers, which is a band in Maine that's incredibly popular. He's the guitar player for that band. And I recently discovered, and I've been in contact with him, he has an electronic group also that's called the Button Men. And it's fabulous. Like, it's all like super heavy 80s synth kind of stuff. So that's another prospect of something that we've never played together. I did some recording with my band Split Willow at his studio last year, and he's an amazing engineer, and he's a super cool guy. So I only know him through that. But he has this whole other electronic band that's in a whole nother side to his personality. So that's another prospect. And then one of my favorite groups and one of my closest friends is a guy named Tom Luther. I have a really long history with him, and we've played in lots of different bands together. He's primarily a piano player, and he's had many, many different projects over the years. He's one of the most prolific, musical chameleons that I know, because he's always kind of doing something different. He's always reinventing what he does, and he always keeps you guessing. He has this group. He's had this band or another solo group for the last couple of years called Sphere Music, and it's very atmospheric, It very much reminds me at times of Autechre. But he has this band called Sphere Music, and he's pretty awesome. And we did a show this past summer together, which was a super great time. And he's just somebody I really look up to, and he's just an amazing artist. So it's really interesting and pretty amazing that suddenly there's like a whole group of people who are doing electronic music. And the other thing that's great is all of these artists are all doing original based stuff. You know, this is all original music. They're not necessarily DJing or playing other people's tracks. It's all original based, and each group is so different from each other. You know, and I think the stuff that we do as Quantum is a combination of, you know, we have, you know, a little bit of all those things maybe in our music, but I think what we do is pretty different to everybody. So there's like this really amazing variety of stuff. So I'm really excited moving into the future, the prospects of us doing something together that's like serious, and maybe, you know, maybe doing some smaller shows where we have double bills, like, you know, one or two other groups together. But I would love to do something where we could get everybody. But the general goal is to try to find a place, and I'm still working on it. I have a couple of things kind of on the back burner right now. Generally, find a place where I feel like we could get like a residency going, because suddenly there's like all of these great, amazing electronic artists that I know, and they're doing just incredible stuff. So you know, it's super inspiring. So moving forward, that's one thing I'm really trying to get going and try to keep it going into the future, and try to get something, you know, kind of established to where we can do it, you know, basically, because I feel like there's an audience for it. I think people really love electronic music, and you know, but there aren't any necessarily there isn't like the venue or the place or kind of the scene to go to that kind of environment here. There every now and then things happen like that. Like with us with Quantum and Ronnie Enor, he plays lots of music, and we've done lots of gigs, and we've been, you know, like what we do with Quantum, we've been really fortunate to kind of make it work, even though there isn't really a scene per se. We've managed to kind of make it work and be pretty successful, I think, to a degree with it. And it's tough trying to navigate through it because there isn't that scene. But I think it's okay. But now that over time, where suddenly met all of these people that are doing it, there's like an actual scene of like a pool of different musicians. So I'm going to be really, you know, focusing moving forward on that. So stay tuned for that. So this brings me to the big show. This is a movie that I've been wanting to do for so freaking long, it kind of hurts. It's called The Spookies. And this movie is just like one of the most bizarre and completely almost bizarre and bonkers like film experience I've ever had. It came out in 1985, and I have a pretty long history actually with this film. I just recently picked this up on Blu-ray. It was probably last year, and I've seen it a bunch of times since then. I actually watched this again last night, and I just so love this movie. This is one of my favorite kind of B horror sci-fi exploitation movies like ever, and it truly is one of those films. I mean, in a lot of ways, this film is such an utter, complete train wreck, but because it's so over the top, and so many things about it are inconsistent. In its own incredibly strange way, it works, and I just kind of feel like this movie is definitely on my top tier of like my top, you know, one of my favorite films of all time, and in particular, and definitely within the style of like exploitation horror grindhouse cinema. I mean, this is a true gem. And when I got this last year on Blu-ray, I was going through the aisles, and I came across it, and I was just like, oh my god, I couldn't believe it, because I remember seeing this movie a bunch of times when I was a kid, it was a regular staple of mine when I was a kid on VHS. And it's such a bizarre movie. It's got this incredibly bizarre history. And this Blu-ray is definitely one of my favorite Blu-rays that I have in my entire collection. The transfer of this film on Blu-ray is just gorgeous and beautiful. The coolest thing about this film is it's two discs, and the second disc has like 3.5 hours of special features. And the story on how this film was made is almost more insane than the actual movie. It's unbelievable. I started watching the second disc last night, and it's kind of jaw dropping on how this movie was made and all the circumstances around it. But the packaging is amazing, and this is one of my all time favorite movies. And I definitely feel like I this movie has a cult following, but I'm amazed by like the guys that I like on YouTube who do a lot of reviews on a lot of these strange, obscure films. Never talk about this film, and which I'm really shocked, and I'm shocked by. And I just feel like this movie is so underrated. I think everybody needs to see this movie because it's so completely silly and ridiculous. But the best way to sum it up, I'll just read it. Of all the bizarre horror films in the 1980s, Spookies easily ranks among the weirdest. Produced by Michael Lee, founder of the adored UK home video distributor Vipco, the film became a fan favorite to its expertly rendered creature effects and notorious bizarre production. Directors Brendan Faulkner and Thomas Doran and co-writer producer Frank M. Farrell were fired and replaced by Eugene Joseph, who added new scenes and re-edited previously shot footage, resulting in this legendary oddity of a movie that's known as Spookies. And so the history of this film is just so incredibly deranged. The producer on this film is Michael Lee, and he was a kind of a bigwig in the whole kind of grindhouse cinema world in the 70s and 80s. Michael Lee started Vipco, which was a UK based company, and he was a real pivotal figure, probably the main guy that basically released all of the exploitation and grindhouse movies that came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He released them on VHS, and he became like a millionaire off of it. A lot of these films went from just being shown in grindhouses, and then they went to obscurity. And he was one of the first guys to basically, when VHS first hit, he capitalized on trying to, get the rights to all of these films, and he was the biggest guy, and he was the biggest distributor of all of these films, of all of the, you name it, all of the American exploitation horror films, all of the Italian horror films that came out, and all the European films that came out during the 60s, 70s, and 80s that like totally, they had they kind of left their mark in the cinema, in the grindhouse circuit, and then they went to total obscurity, and then he brought all these back to light. And it was also during the time when the whole like video nasty thing was happening in England, where suddenly there was this this giant lockdown on, it was basically censorship of where all of these movies were deemed to be works of pornography, or they were too perverse to be seen by the public. So a lot of these movies were banned, and they were labeled as the video nasties. And Michael Lee was one of the first guys to basically release these films that were deemed to be video nasties. So he was responsible for producing this movie. And the director for these films, Brendan Faulkner and Thomas Doran, were originally the creators of this movie. And Michael Lee was the producer, and he backed this film, Spookies. And it led to the two principal guys who started this idea to them getting fired in the middle of the entire production. And Michael Lee brought in another director and a whole new crew, and they basically reshot half of the film. But what they ended up doing was they took all the footage and they put it together. So it has this completely, like, when you watch this film, it just, it's very disorienting. And there's times where the film, like, you can see where the narrative or the story completely jumps off the rails, and it doesn't make any sense. But I think this movie, because there's something about the disorientation around that, and there's so many great, like practical effects in this film, where on one hand it's some of the worst practical effects, but then at the same time there's some of the greatest practical effects, and there's like this full spectrum of things of where this is so bad, of this film is so bad on so many levels, and I think because it goes so off the rails, where it just kind of hangs on by a thread, it works in its own incredibly strange way. And I almost feel like the documentaries with the filmmakers on in this collection is amazing. And they have, the original filmmakers, Brendan Faulkner and Thomas Doran, really have a terrible attitude towards Michael Lee. Like, they all hate each other, basically. Like, there's an interview with one of the producers who worked with Brian Faulkner, and he basically, was saying that he wished or wishes that Michael Lee would die. Like, it's that bad. Or they wish death on each other. And, and I think it was a complicated, hot mess to the, nth degree. And, a lot of unprofessional things happened. They got fired. They had, Michael Lee came in and basically took control and usurped the whole film, and didn't give them any, way of expressing themselves anymore. So he pretty much gutted their whole idea. But it's a funny thing. It's a weird thing because on one hand, Michael Lee was, I think, with a lot of these films that I cover, such as, a lot of these grindhouse films, he was without. I'm sure somebody somebody else would have eventually have done it, or another company would have sprouted up. But as far as releasing all of these kind of obscure gems that were just seen once or twice in the theater for for a period of time, and then they went into total obscurity. He was the guy that brought, with his company Vipco, he brought all these movies back to life, and he kind of ushered in the age of a VHS, which created this massive following for all of these like weird obscure films. And he was kind of the godfather for that. He really was the pivotal guy who created this demand. He did very questionable things, obviously, and he was probably in some ways, a little bit of a scumbag, but it kind of sticks in with the whole kind of vibe of Grindhouse, I guess. But and it's interesting too because they have an interview with Michael Lee on here, which is super fascinating. And both camps blame each other, and they're both like, very. They have all this animosity even to this day about this, about how this film went down. But that being said, as a viewer, aside from the drama aspect of it and all the stuff that happened behind the scenes, I almost feel like all of that tension and all of this crap that happened during the film, where people getting fired and replaced, and really terrible business dealings, people getting screwed over, I really feel like all of that crap really made this film what it is. And I think without all of that chaos happening, I don't think this film, if it was released under, say, quote unquote normal circumstances, where the creative forces who created the story, Dave Faulkner and stuff, if they were free reign, allowed to fully, show what their vision was, I think it probably would have still been probably good. But I think with all of the chaos that happened during this production, I think, it made this film into the gem that it is, and in its own weird way, I feel like this movie is a masterpiece. And so without that chaos, I don't feel like this would be what it is, at least in my world. And and it's a fascinating story. It's so complicated. And to think that this movie came out and it was literally like regarded as like a piece of garbage when it came out by everybody involved because of the how basically there were two movies that were just like chopped and gutted and then put together in this blender with no real rhyme or reason at times. It eventually found its audience, and now it's like regarded as like this cult film that is kind of a masterpiece. And I'm one of those people that, no accounting for taste, but I'm one of those people that regards this film as that. So I can't recommend this movie enough. Spookies, um, just just an amazing film. Um, yeah, with all the chaos that went on and all of the the catastrophes that happened, it's still in my book one of the greatest one of the greatest movies of the 80s, uh, in the year 1985. So I highly recommend this movie. Can't recommend it enough. This is Jason Dean, a film fanatic. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.